Good evening, good evening, good evening. Welcome. Welcome. Come on in the room and let me know you're here. Drop your self in the comments so I can shout you out before we get started. We have a great show in store for you tonight. Yay, yay, yay. Our resident therapist is back to help us. So come on in the room. Okay, come on in, drop a comment, let me know you are here so that we can have a good show tonight. I'm hoping you guys took last week off and that you really were intentional about taking this hour that we normally would share together to love on yourself and to have some self-care. I don't know. I'm a little skeptical. I haven't heard anything. So I'm hoping you guys did that and kind of just detached for a minute in honor of Mental Health Awareness Month. This is still Mental Health Awareness Month, and so we are talking about mental health tonight. And last week we took a little sabbatical to have some self-care for our mental health. Invite somebody. Hey, Floyd. Invite somebody to come and join us because this is a critical conversation. How do we manage our triggers? This is a triggering time. We have been living through a triggering season, okay? But now things are shifting. Now they're starting to put out protocols about, mask and no mask and vaccines and all this stuff. And so there are different things that could be happening. We're going to talk about that tonight as well. So come on in the room. We want to get started. It's already 9:01. I'll give you 2 more minutes, and then I'm going to bring our special guest into this space, and we are going to talk about how to manage these triggers so that we aren't out here looking all sorts of out of control. Hey, Cheryl, thank you for being on. So the Kilgores are here. All right, come on in the room and let me know you're here. You definitely are going to want to hear this. Feel free to share it on your page. Yes, Dr. Joyner is out to dinner tonight, so she may not be able to make it. So we're going to have to start with our daughter tonight. But the rest of you, let me know you're here so I can definitely shout you out. I'm always honored when you guys are in the space with me. You give me life, you give me energy. So it's a blessing to have you join in. So, and thank you. This is my marketing guru, evangelist Cheryl Joyner Drumgo Kilgore does my marketing for me. So as you can see, she drops people's name in the chat to get them to come on in. Thank you, daughter. Remind them, yes, they need to be on. They need to be on. Okay, I got 9:03. I'm not waiting any longer. Hey, Key, I am going to go ahead and get started so that we can have as much time as possible to talk about this. So let's get started. All right. Welcome, everyone, to Teacher's Rants and Musings. I'm so glad you decided to join us on tonight. We have such a good episode in store for you. I already know it's going to be good because it's our resident therapist, Kristin Miller, LCSW, is back with us. It was like almost a year to the date that we had her on the show for the first time last year when we started Rants and Musings, and she came and she taught us all about understanding trauma. What it means, how to understand if we have it, we've experienced it, which from what she told us, most of us have, and she normalized it for us to understand that trauma is nothing to have shame about. It's something we all share, but it's something that you can resolve and you can get healed from, and that, you don't have to live your life from a traumatic space, right? From that same space. Tonight, she's coming back It's been it's been a year. We had a couple of times in the series in a row, but it's almost been a full year since she's been back on, I think. And so we are honored that she's willing to come in and talk to us. Again, you guys know her. She's the founder of Mosaic Consulting and Counseling. She does workshops all over the state for NASW, for different schools, for different organizations around trauma, around anti-racism, around so many different things. And she has been emerging as a really foremost voice in the fight for social justice, in the fight for racial equality, as well as in the fight around trauma and understanding trauma and moving us from brokenness to wholeness. So please help me welcome none other than Kristin Miller. Welcome, Kristin.
Hi. I'm so excited to be back.
Yes.
I've been counting down the minutes all day to 9 o'clock.
Yay, yay. We love to have you. We call you our resident therapist. You have helped us so much. And so we are grateful that you were willing to come back on tonight to help us. And again, we're talking about managing triggers. Yeah. So why don't we just start? Because I want to give you, Keisha, hey, resident counselor. I want to give you enough time as possible to just be able to help us. So why not let's just start with triggers. And let me set up this context this way. We hear people talk, things become buzzwords as more things become more and more popular, right? Mm-hmm. Traumas become more popular. And so we hear the term triggers all the time. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure people are always using it properly, or are they confusing triggers of trauma triggers with just a feeling being triggered inside of them? Right. So can you explain to us what a trigger is and what should we be relating as a trigger and knowing as a trigger versus what just might be a feeling?
Yeah, absolutely. So I would agree with you. I think there is some confusion, and it is very common today to hear people say, I feel triggered. I feel triggered. And it's like, well, what does that even mean? So I think it's important to understand that most triggers are connected to experiences from our past. So that can be both positive and negative things, right? So let's say, for example, if you and I went to my mother's house and she had a plate of cookies out, right? For you, it might just be a delicious cookie. For me, it's much more than the cookie. Just her homemade cookies bring up these positive memories for me of helping my mom bake, lick the bowl after it's done, waiting for the cookies to come out of the oven. So there are many positive triggers that we experience where something in the present is reminding us of something positive from our past. But
wait. Just so I'm clear, triggers can be positive.
Yes.
Every trigger is not something negative.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And I think another helpful way to think about it, because I think this is something everybody experiences, there are certain songs that when they come on the radio, it's not just a song, it's transporting you back to a time in your life where you have positive memories. Yes. So it's literally, you get some of those feelings that you had when you initially heard that song. And again, it's this connection to the past. A lot of the traumas, though, or a lot of the triggers that we would want to talk about managing are triggers that are connected to negative past experiences and or trauma. And before I talk about that, I think it is also important to acknowledge people can feel, like you're saying, there can be this unwanted or unpleasant emotional response to things that may not be connected to our past, right? So for example, if we think about a lot of the videos on social media now, right? Whether it's police murdering innocent people, or we're seeing videos of what's happening in Palestine, right? Those things don't necessarily have to be connected to our past to have this really distressed reaction to
Right.
injustices or to other people's pain. But when we're talking about managing our own triggers, it often is connected to negative past experiences and or traumas. And so what happens with that, similarly to the positive experiences where we're transported back in time and we're in that space of almost re-experiencing the positive memories, what can happen for people with trauma, and especially unresolved trauma, is they are literally being transported back in time to the actual traumatic event. And so
Wow.
what's happening is in the moment, even though their body is physically present in this moment, psychologically, they're experiencing what they experienced in the past. And so what can happen with trauma, because there is a reaction in our bodies, right? So somebody could logically or rationally feel physically safe, but they're experiencing a trauma trigger, and now their palms are getting sweaty and their heart starts racing and their chest feels tight. And so there might not really be a threat in the present, but it doesn't matter because it's a real experience that they are having that is extremely distressing to them. So it feels like the trauma is literally happening again in the moment.
Wow. So is that a flashback? Is that reminiscent, the same? Are they one and the same? Or like an intrusive thought? Or is this something different?
No, it can be all of those things.
Okay.
So triggers, it can, because it's really something about the situation. And I'll talk a little bit about different categories of triggers, but something is happening where, yes, it could be intrusive thoughts coming up. It could be flashbacks in their mind, pictures of things that had happened to them. It could be, again, those biological responses that were happening. Because as we've talked about with the neurobiology of trauma, right, when we feel that we are in danger, the rational part of our brain is shutting down, right? Because our brain doesn't want to give us time to think. We either need to fight and become safe, or flight, right? Run, get to safety. And so the rational part of people's brains are often not functioning when they're being triggered. So they notice something is happening, right? Either I'm physically having sensations in my body, or I notice I just got really angry, or I got really upset. And people really might not even be connecting in the moment. What's really happening for me? What is this really about?
Wow. So as I framed the conversation tonight about the way the world is starting to open up now, right? And people with anxiety during the pandemic, and anxieties had gone up during the pandemic times because it was just so, anxiety ridden, right? Like that's to be expected. So now that the world is opening back up more, they're letting more space, people are filling in these spaces that before was a little less. And now they're saying you may be able to take your mask off. I know anxieties for people are probably going to be heightened. Can that be can all of that be a part of something that's triggering for them? Is there some triggers that can come out of that they should be mindful of to figure out how to manage? What do we do with this anxiety that might be coming?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I think one of the most important things is really creating space to check in with yourself, right? We live in this world where there are constant distractions and competing demands. We all usually have our phones within 1 or 2 feet of us.
Yes.
Right? And so, you have a 10-minute break between work meetings. What do most people do? You grab your phone and you scroll, right? And so for most people, we're not really giving our brains, our bodies, our spirits the chance to be, right? And to tune into, right? If we're believers, we want to tune into God and what he may be saying to us. And even if not, what's happening, right? How am I feeling? What am I thinking about as I prepare to go back into the world? What are my thoughts and feelings about that, right? Because there are some people that are feeling a sense of relief, right? Like, okay, we can finally get back to doing certain things. And then there are a lot of people who, like you're saying, are extremely fearful.
Yeah.
Right? There's a part of them that wants the world to open up again, but they're also extremely fearful, right? When we hear there are many people, understandably so, that don't want to get vaccinated. So what does that mean as the world opens up? So I really think this idea of checking in with yourself so you can figure out what is really happening for me. And for some people, that may mean limiting news, right? Because COVID is constantly on the news. And yes, we want to be educated and aware. But we also want to be mindful of the source of the news that we're watching.
Right.
Because certain types of news can really exacerbate people's anxiety about things.
Yeah, I've been thinking about the anxiety that people might be experiencing, thinking about the loneliness and depression that might be coming, like where seasons start to trigger feelings for people. But then just, thinking about grief, right? I'm coming up on the first anniversary of my father's passing. So many people had to deal with, the holidays with not having their parent, or this their first one because of COVID. So many people lost parents. So how do you know when you're experiencing a trigger? Is it that you're just feeling something? What should you pay attention to in your body? When you say check in with yourself, what are you looking for?
So I think one of the helpful things to think about, because again, people may throw that term, I'm triggered, around, right? So there are times when we're experiencing emotions and it really is like, it is what it is, right? So let's say somebody is stuck in traffic, right? And so they are getting very upset, they're getting frustrated, but that's really all it is, right? Oftentimes, a sign that it may be something deeper is when you're noticing the intensity of your reaction seems quite severe, right? If you're able to, again, take a step back and notice your reaction, you really want to ask yourself, okay, so what's happening that I am reacting so intensely to this, right? Because being stuck in traffic, maybe for a trauma survivor, right? Let's say there was a trauma survivor who, as a child, used to be locked in a basement, right? Then the idea of being stuck in a car, that really may be a trauma trigger for that.
Wow.
So it's really thinking about what's happening for me. So when you're noticing, okay, or if you have friends and family telling you like, that reaction seems a bit out of proportion, that's often a signal that there are these deeper level, potentially unresolved things that are being triggered.
It's so funny you say that about the intensity, and maybe you can help me out because I'm a jumpy person, right? And when I used to have tenants, if they walked up on me, I mean, it took nothing. I would be hollering, ah! Like was for me. I always felt like it was, and I would scare them, or then they would be so apologetic because I literally started screaming, right?
Right.
And it has happened to me when I'm in my cube at my job. You know, I have it's a cubicle so people can walk up if I'm behind, and I have literally walked up behind, turned around, saw somebody standing, and started screaming.
Right.
And I've been so embarrassed by it. But then I started to think, is something wrong with me? Like, is that coming from, because the intensity to me is not like a jump. Oh, you scared me, startled me. No, it's a full throttle, honest to God, scream.
Right.
Like, almost as if I'm going to go into fight or flight. I don't know, but I just start screaming. And I'm convinced it's a little over the top. So I've always wondered, is that a subconscious trauma reaction? Am I still afraid somehow? Like, I don't know. But what do you think?
Yeah. I love that you asked that, and I love even your thought process, because I think this is what happens for people. So one of the things you want to do is really try to just be curious, right? Okay, I just want to be curious about my reactions, because a lot of times people, and especially women, the automatic thought is something's wrong with me. What's wrong with me? Right? And so what happens is we start to judge ourselves. That inner critic voice comes out.
It's true.
Right? And so what happens is we shut down the process. Right? Because now I'm judging myself. Now I feel like something's wrong with me. Now I'm in shame. And so I just try to move on. Right? I might try to numb, but I'm not actually spending the time being curious and investigating. Okay, what's really happening? So you really want to be curious and non-judgmental. And then you want, because you know you, right? So there are some people that, trauma or no trauma, they might just feel emotions more intensely than others, right? If we think about even people who have mood disorders, they may feel emotions more intensely than others, and it may not necessarily be connected to trauma.
Okay.
But I think it's always important to consider, how may this be connected to my earlier life experiences? Because that definitely sounds like a potential trauma reaction. And the reality is, there's a book that's called The Body Keeps the Score.
Yes.
And it talks about how trauma is stored in the body. So sometimes people can do the work of processing through some of their trauma, and it can, mostly be resolved. But that doesn't mean that nothing is ever going to trigger us again. So I think one of the things we want to do tonight is normalize. We all have triggers, right? Trauma is common. We all have them. So the problem isn't having a trigger. The problem is not being able to figure out what's happening, and also not figuring out ways to manage the triggers, right? Because we're human. I find myself often, especially with my Christian clients, I notice this pattern of women not giving themselves permission to feel feelings, right? And so one of the things I always talk about is Jesus, right? And how, despite being the Son of God, right, in his humanity, he experienced a wide range of emotions, right? Yes. He was triggered, right? Yes. He was angry at different points. He was in anguish. He felt betrayed, right?
Yes.
He experienced all of those emotions. So I think it's really important for us to create the space to remember all of our feelings are okay, and that we really want to look at triggers as teachers, right? Triggers are showing us, right? Okay, there's likely something I need to pay a little bit more attention to, right? It's going to point me to my brokenness. It's going to show me where I may need to do a little bit more healing work. And so triggers aren't a bad thing, right? They really can be essential. And they're a normal part of somebody's healing process. Because if I can identify what my triggers are, then I can appropriately plan, right? There's some triggers that people experience that they might be able to actually avoid those triggers, right? That's not true for everything, but let's say somebody's trauma happened at a specific place. They might never have to go there again. And that's okay, right? So people can figure out ways to navigate around it. But if it's triggers that you cannot escape, then it's figuring out, how can I plan ahead? How can I have some skills so that when I'm in these situations and I am being triggered, I feel more in control of my reaction.
Wow. And I think when you say there's some triggers you can potentially avoid, I think about those triggers that you can't, that just come up on you, like
Yeah.
when certain smells that you
Yes.
just end up smelling something and it transports you back to, which could be a positive thing, right?
Yeah.
I can smell a perfume scent and it can remind me of my grandmother, or I
Yeah.
can smell a different scent and it can remind me, or someone, I should say, can smell a different scent and it can remind them of their molester or their abuser,
Yes.
because they wore that same or had that scent. Or so but I like what you said about how we got to normalize it. Like it doesn't mean something wrong is happening.
No.
It's teaching you that you are feeling something, that something is happening, and that book you said, I gotta get that, where the body keeps the score. You said the body keeps the score, because I know that I can remember just from having surgery, that since my surgery, I used to like, blood and gore movies, horror movies. I used to be able to watch them without feeling anything.
Right.
And now I can watch them mentally, but I will feel it physically.
Interesting.
I feel like, I don't know, it's like pins and needles in my body though.
Yes.
So it's just weird. I can't watch them the same way anymore, because I start to feel it in my legs or feel it in my body. And it's just weird. That's when I realized that your body really does retain and have memory of. So when I see someone going through surgery, my body can respond. And I'm looking at it like, well, I don't get why this is like, it's not bothering me to be like, oh my God, look at the blood.
Right.
But my body is saying, look at the blood, look at the incision, look at this or something. And so to think of that, if our bodies can do that physically, what our minds can then do, right?
Yes.
And what our minds and how they store memories. So how does it fit in when, because you said we have to, the problem comes in with figuring them out, right? And what happens when you've repressed so much though? Right? How do you, like, when you've repressed a lot of your trauma? And we talked about this the week before last, I think it was, and I was just talking about how there's so many secrets we have held, especially as women, of things that have happened to us, and we have repressed the trauma that we've gone through. We've not talked about them. We've not dealt with them. We've moved on in life and feel fine, like it never happened, until we get triggered somehow.
Right.
Or we don't even realize that our reactions and responses to people and our ways of being is because we've never resolved those traumas. So then you're sitting in meetings with people who, like this, can go off, and their tempers are so much, or they're quick to go into, an attack mode to a certain extent. how do you then, what do you need to do? Do you need to bring up those memories to start confronting those? How do you start to make the connection that you're being triggered, your reactions are because you have had these experiences that you've never talked about, never dealt with?
Right. So I have a few thoughts. I think again, I'm gonna say self-reflection, right? Self-awareness. So that piece is super important. And I think you want to think about, I think it can help to look at different categories of triggers. So one would be people, right? So sometimes, and I think we all have these people that literally just being in the presence of some people, we have a visceral reaction to, right? So that's important, right? If I don't actually have a history with this person, is this person reminding me of someone in my life that I may have had either traumatic experiences or just some kind of negative experiences with? Because people can remind us of people from our past.
Can I ask you a question before you move on with this? Does that mean that it's unresolved? Like, would that happen if you have resolved that trauma?
So I think a helpful way to think about it is there's no way to go through life without experiencing any triggers. The difference is going to be with someone with unresolved trauma, they may lack the insight and awareness to connect it. And the difference is also going to be the intensity. Someone who has really processed through and resolved trauma, that doesn't mean they're never going to be triggered ever again. But it's likely that those triggers are going to happen much less frequently, and likely the intensity is going to be less. But I think there are also exceptions to that when people go through major life changes, right? So for example, I'm thinking of a client that I had worked with that had a lot of childhood trauma from her mother, right? And she did tremendous work in therapy and got to a place where, you know, she was good. And then once she had her daughter, that triggered, right, some of those things that she had processed through. Because another trigger can be thoughts, right? So I'm not good enough, right? I'm just like my mother, right? All of these things that she had worked through, her having her own daughter brought some of those things to the surface, right? And so again, we want to normalize that. Okay, this is a major life change, right? You're adjusting to something new. So she came back and we did some short-term work on that. But we had done some long-term therapy to really deal with her childhood trauma. Then it was kind of like, okay, let's just do some short-term work. She kind of did some more work on them and she was good. So I hope that's a helpful example of what can happen for people, right? Because we are human, right? We're not robots where we just resolve stuff and now we don't have any emotions. So things are going to still come up sometimes.
Wow. So you said the category can be people. People can trigger you and remind you of someone, good or bad, but you want to look at, especially if it's connected to trauma.
Right.
So it could be thoughts where certain life events can now trigger different thoughts that you used to have about yourself, bringing that back to the forefront. What else? What other kind of categories can these triggers fall in?
Well, and if I can just give another example related to thoughts, because I think there's two categories that I think people often miss. Thoughts is one of them, because while we're having thousands of thoughts in a day, we have more unconscious than conscious thoughts in a day. So you're describing a work environment. right? So somebody could be in the work meeting, and if they have unresolved stuff and say one of their underlying thoughts is, I'm not good enough. And then that gets triggered. Let's say you're meeting with the person to give them some constructive feedback about their performance, right? And now their reaction does not seem to match. You're talking to them respectfully and calmly. You're highlighting positive things that they've done, but you're also saying, hey, I need you to work on this. If one of their trauma triggers is, I'm not good enough, they can have this intense reaction, whether it's a visible reaction, right? Where, we've all seen people go off when they're upset, or it could just be somebody breaking down crying in your office, or they could hold it together and then kind of go have their own reaction on their own. So a lot of times in interactions with people, thoughts are being triggered, and that's really what's triggering people. It's these unresolved, I'm not lovable, I'm not good enough, people I love will leave me, I'm not in control. So noticing those thoughts is really important. Things can remind people of things. So it could be, you could see a picture of someone, right? And just seeing the picture is a trigger. For people who have lost loved ones, right? Sometimes even just, let's say you're still living in the same house, just seeing the person's clothing can be a trigger. Getting a piece of mail addressed to them can trigger, the unresolved grief. And then just different activities, right? So let's say, teenagers playing football, there's a traumatic event that happens there. It could literally be after that literally somebody just turning on a football game, right? That can really cause a trauma reaction. I'm thinking of a client that I'd worked with who would be sexually abused by a family member around the same time every day, because that's when her mother would be at work. And there was a specific TV show that was on in the background. And so when the mother would turn on this show, even as a little girl, she would have a meltdown, and the mother never understood what was happening. And so this was something that we ended up processing in therapy. So even things that as adults, especially if you have children, or if you are a auntie, godparent, we really want to stay away from that. What's wrong with you? Right? Because we all do that sometimes. Like, what's wrong with you? Have you lost your mind? Right? But it's really like, no, I just want to be curious. Like, what's going on? I want to understand your reaction, right? We talked about trauma informed,
right?
From what's wrong with you to what happened to you.
Yeah. That's so interesting, and it makes me think of, especially in the workplace, because for me, that's where I feel like I see so much unresolved trauma and triggers happening in that space. And it's hard to then say, baby girl, you're crying because you have unresolved trauma. Like
right.
It's hard as the manager to say, I'm gonna need you to go to therapy, get that together, because
right.
I can't even tell you nothing, because you can't. And I just had that experience happen, actually, where I was trying to do performance improvement with a new hire, and she just couldn't hear the critique. And she needed to just be told she was doing a good job.
Right.
But she wasn't.
Right.
And I had to let her go, because we could never get to a place where she could hear the critique. Right. And it was such a reaction for her. And it just made, and I felt so bad, because I could tell this is not about me. This is triggering something for her.
Yeah.
Because it's not even, it's not even like you said, nobody's yelling at you. Nobody's telling you you're a horrible worker. Someone's telling you these are some of the mistakes you made, and this is how, but you can't process that, because it just lands for you as if I'm saying you're bad.
Yes. And it's pushing her trauma triggers.
And it's pushing her trauma triggers. And it was like, she was like, if she felt like it was a hostile environment.
Wow.
And it was like, but no one's being hostile towards you.
Right.
What people are just saying is you're not doing the stuff right. But for her, it just felt like an attack.
Right.
And so I see it so many times in that way that it's made me more, sensitive to it.
Right.
But you also said something about children and recognizing when our children are responding to things and not just, and I think it's so important too, because children to me have a keen sense of discernment, right? Your children and your dog. Your dog will tell you. I was talking to one of my girlfriends. She was like, "Girl, I knew that guy wasn't there because my dog was like, oh, like
right.
They could pick up, things and be like, girl, don't trust that one."
Yes.
But it's like, how do we tune into and tap into them and their understanding and discernment and be able to see when they're being triggered? Because I think what I feel like happens oftentimes is we push up against each other's triggers. I'm triggered, you're triggered, and we're fighting triggers, and we're just fighting each other, and it's just not healthy. So it creates this dynamic in our families where you're yelling, that's triggering me. I'm responding out of that, and I remember that in my own marriage. Being triggered by some of the arguments and stuff, and so it takes on a whole different look now.
Yes.
Once I've been triggered, so how do we tap into even the triggers of those around us?
Mm-hmm. So I think there's just one other thing I want to add, and then I'll answer that. So the other category to just pay attention to is emotional states. So for some people, literally what's the trauma trigger is when they're perceiving tension in an environment. Right? So for some people, if growing up, if conflict meant aggression or abuse, there's some people whose trauma triggers is literally just tension and conflict. That if they're just sensing somebody's upset with them, right? That literally all of those triggers are happening. Fear of abandonment. Right? Whether it's or real, right? Yes. So we've all probably known or maybe even done ourselves, right? You're in a relationship and you think the person's going to break up with you, right? Now, if you have a sense of worth and you've done your work, right? And you're a believer, you're going to believe, okay, well, if this doesn't work out, God must have somebody better, right? If you have this intense fear of abandonment, the person cannot call you for a week. You are blowing up their phone. You are showing up at their house, right?
Stalking their IG page, right?
Yes. Yes. And so I think, again, these are things that we can make light of and say, what is wrong with you, right? But sometimes it really is that fear of abandonment got activated. And so somebody in that trauma trigger can become so desperate to avoid abandonment that they're doing things that are not healthy or helpful, but they're just doing whatever they need to do to try to manage the trigger. And then the last one I'm going to say is, and I think this is something important to pay attention to as well. For people with unresolved trauma, healthy relationships can actually become the trigger because it's so unfamiliar.
Wow.
And they feel so vulnerable in those relationships, right? Dysfunctional relationships, abusive relationships, they might not be fulfilled in those relationships, but it feels comfortable. So they can actually feel a bit safer because they know how to navigate it, right? They've been doing that their whole life. So then somebody comes along that treats somebody with respect, right? And is demonstrating their value. And so people with unresolved trauma often don't know what to do with that. It feels very, feel very unworthy. And so that can trigger acting out behaviors.
Wow. 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 So then how do you recognize it in others?
Yes. So how do you recognize triggers in others?
Like if your daughter or son is being triggered or your spouse is being triggered, like how do we increase our sensitivity to what might be happening for others around us as well?
I mean, I think a lot of it really does start in the family. And I think the most powerful thing that parents can do in terms of being the best parent is to do your own work, right? Because what you tell your child, what you lecture your child about, right? That is never going to be as powerful as what you're modeling. And like you said, children are discerning, children are paying attention to everything. So if you're telling your daughter, you need to make sure people treat you with respect, but you're in an abusive marriage, right? Then it really doesn't matter what you're saying. The most powerful thing is what's modeled. So you as the parent having healthy relationships, not just with other people, extended family, friends, but also having a healthy relationship with yourself, right? Where you're modeling. So for parents, if you're triggered, right? And all parents are going to do this at different points. They're going to lose it in frustration, right? It's so powerful to go to your child and say, you know what? I was being triggered and I apologize, right? I went off on you. That was my own stuff, right? That is so powerful because then we're modeling, number one, I take responsibility for myself and my emotions and my behavior. And we're also modeling, I'm not perfect. We all fall short, right? So then you're giving your child permission to do that. And so I think the more you're doing that, the more you're helping your child label feelings, right? And creating space to talk about these things, right? So you being able to be in a place where you can like, hey, I'm concerned about what what just happened earlier. Can you tell me about it? Right? Really just opening up the space for children to be able to talk. Because we can say, oh, I'm your mom. Come to me about anything. Well, depending on what you're modeling, your child may or may not. I'm thinking of a client that I was working with who, parents had a really bitter divorce. Right. And so the child wanted a relationship with her father, but because of mom's issues with dad, right, she was not pursuing the relationship. And as she got older, that was part of what we had to address in therapy. How mom, absolutely, she has her own experiences with this person, but you're kind of handing your own baggage to your child if you're not allowing her, as she gets older, right, to make certain decisions for herself. I think and being able to give direct feedback to people, right? So if you're somebody that's kind of conflict avoidant, that's a muscle to work on developing. That in healthy relationships, we want to be able to give direct feedback to people that we love. And sometimes also just giving people permission to give feedback, right? A lot of times we tell children, you need to stay in the child's place, right? Children are to be seen and not heard. And I'm definitely not suggesting, children should be telling their parents how to parent, but giving direct feedback to each other, right? Having family meetings once a week, right? Hey, what do we feel like we're doing well as a family? What can we do better as a family? Is any of us struggling, right? Because if one's struggling, then we're all part of the solution.
Yes.
So who's struggling? Okay, how can we help you? Because I think that's the other thing we don't do enough of. We think about what would help us, and then we do that for other people, when that might not be what's helpful. So literally just as a parent, how can I help you with this? How can I be a support to you? And empowering your children to tell you, mom, dad, whoever, auntie, grandma, it would help me if you whatever. And then as a parent, you can decide, yeah, I think I can do that, or no, I can't. And then making decisions about when people may need therapy, right? Like I want to, because I'm going back to something that you had asked earlier about what if somebody has all these repressed memories, right? And that's often a time to seek therapy. If there's all these repressed memories that you've never dealt with, right? And there's a lot of family secrets and you're just carrying all of that. That's often a sign that maybe going to therapy, that's a safe space.
Yes.
To process.
Yes.
Anything that you need to process. Because shame only lives in secrecy.
You say that every time you say it, it's so powerful to me.
Yeah, shame only lives in secrecy. That's the environment where shame thrives, right? And so what's the antidote to that? It's not telling your business to everybody, right? Because again, that idea, not everybody has earned the right to heal, to hear your story. But being selective, there is something that is so freeing. While it can be very anxiety provoking, right? When you share your story with someone else, it's so powerful. And you often give other people permission, like, oh, I was struggling with that too, but I was so ashamed, I never told anybody. So from a faith perspective, we know a lot of the things that God allows us to go through, right? When we do our work, then we can be used by him to set other people free from their suffering.
Yes.
I think, therapy can be that place because we cannot, people have probably heard this, right? You can't heal what you conceal. And so.
Wait. I don't think I've heard it like that before. Oh, great. That's good. You can heal what you conceal. I love it. I feel like you're rapping tonight, Kristin. Oh, wait, let me fix it. What you conceal.
Yeah.
All right. And what does that really mean? Like,
so if you're carrying all the shame around all of these secrets, and the shame can be about things you've endured, trauma you've endured, or it can be about things that you've done, right? I've worked with many women that, they might have had an abortion 20 years ago. They're still carrying shame, right? When God's already forgiven them for it, right? It's in the sea of forgetfulness, but they're still carrying it, right? Or any type of bad decisions, trauma. So if we just conceal it, I think the way that I like to think about it is if you think about the concept of baggage, right? A lot of us are carrying backpacks, right? So there's this thing on our backs, but we don't see behind us, right?
Like
we're navigating the world. The weight is there. It's weighing us down, but we can almost forget it's there. So
I like that.
When we take it off, and for some people that's in therapy, for other people that may be with a pastor, a minister, a trusted friend or family member, right? When you take it off and you unzip the backpack, okay, let me see what's in here. Let me sift and sort through it, right? Because, you're one of your taglines, like brokenness is too expensive, right? And with God, right, that was how I came up with the name of Mosaic, right? For the counseling practice, that broken pieces can make beautiful things. But if we just leave them in broken pieces, then they're broken pieces. There's no purpose, there's no healing. So that piece is really important.
That is so awesome. Thank you so much. Like, you
You're
always come and
welcome.
you say things that just bless us. Okay. Remind us that shame only lives in secrecy. And my new favorite is now going to be, you can't heal what you conceal.
Yes.
But then just the concept of the backpack. A couple of weeks ago, I was talking about baggage day, and I wanted to have an event like a baggage drop service or something. Well, baggage,
Yes.
like I'm going to do something with it. But I like the imagery also of the backpack,
Yes.
right? That some of us have multiple bags that we're carrying, including backpacks. You
Right.
know, that some that we don't know what's in there, some we know we got it, and we've become so used to carrying it that
Yes.
we don't want to let it go. So it's a lot that we can process, can reflect on. But I love that you always bring us to self-awareness. And I guess we only got about 5 minutes left though, to leave any parting words with people about how when thinking of managing triggers, how can they increase the self-awareness? Like,
Mhm.
I know people who think they're so self-aware, but to
Right.
me, they are just walking around being so offensive and don't even know it, and then you can't tell them anything, right?
Right.
But you can't tell them they're not self-reflective and that they don't know who
Right.
they are. And it's how do we become more self-aware?
Right. Yeah, I think that's a great question because I think you're right. The average person really does lack self awareness. And maybe not even because they don't want to be self aware. But again, we live in this really busy world where there's much more of a focus on achieving and doing rather than just being.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think one of the most important things, I think it can be really helpful. The way you start your day, I think, has a significant impact on your day. So spending some time, even if that means setting your alarm 10 minutes earlier than normal, right? Just having that 5 or 10 minutes of just quiet, just being alone with your thoughts and your feelings. I think even I always encourage people to journal. And I think that sometimes feels overwhelming to people, but even committing to doing just 5 minutes of journaling every day, right? Just whatever is coming to your mind, because then you'll start to notice patterns. But I think checking in with yourself, like literally having 5-minute check-ins, right? Let's say morning, maybe once during the day, once in the evening, if you have to set an alarm on your phone. And there's an acronym, and maybe we can figure out how to post it, or we can post it on your Facebook page, that's called SNAP. And I think it's a helpful framework. So the S is for stop. Right? So that idea, like, we have to stop sometimes, right? Shut down your computer, turn off your phone, turn off everything, get by yourself, just stop, right? And then the N is for notice. Notice what's happening around me, what's happening internally for me. The A is for accept. Because a lot of times we're then trying to change our emotional state, right? If I'm sad, oh, I don't want to be sad, right? Well, again, just like triggers are teachers, feelings are teachers too. And it's only by embracing them, inviting them in, that's how I can explore. So it's accepting, okay, this is how I'm feeling right now. It can be accepting a situation. The C is for curious. So being curious about, okay, what's going on for me? Why did this situation trigger me so much? And then the K is for kindness. So how can I show myself self-love, kindness, compassion? And that may also involve extending kindness to somebody else. But really trying to explore without judging. And if you're noticing yourself judging yourself, trying to walk back that thought and, okay, what's another thought I can have about this where I'm really trying to be kind to myself?
Wow. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome.
Always a
Thank you
pleasure.
for having me. Yes,
Yes,
it always
you
is.
bless us all the time. You help regulate us. Within an hour, you help put us back on track. So I am so grateful for you being here. Again, people can connect with you on Instagram, Kristin Miller, um, as well as on Facebook. But then they also can check you out at Mosaic Counseling and Consulting, right?
Yeah.
And especially if they need some of that therapy that
Yes.
we've been talking about. You have a
Absolutely.
nice staff over there, so to God be the glory for the work you are
Yes.
doing. We love you here on Tisa's Rants and Musings. You guys, be sure to share this with somebody that you know might be experiencing triggers and don't even know what's happening to them, and maybe this can help give them another way to think about it and to maybe even get more help. Thank you for being on tonight. So that you guys know, I am also on Vocal every Friday at 12 noon on the Inspired Living Network with Liz Black. So you can see some episodes that you might have missed on Roku every week on Fridays at 12 noon. So watch and join in again and just get reinforced with some of what you might have been hearing or some of what you might have missed. Okay, connect with me on social media and I'll see you guys next week. Thank you so much. Love you all. Bye.